You are listening to Beyond the Whistle. Beyond the Whistle is the show that takes you beyond the X's and O's to provide tips and advice on the business of sports and how sports professionals can advance in their careers. Beyond the Whistle is brought to you by McMillen Sports, a sports executive search and sports leadership consulting firm. Learn more at mccansports.com. Welcome to Beyond the Whistle. I'm your host, Odell McCants, and thank you for listening. This episode, my conversation with Tom McMillen, is very special to me. As a kid growing up in Washington, D.C., I had two dreams: to play in the NBA and to be President of the United States. Having worked in the House of Representatives for a few years out of college and being an NBA agent, I like to think that I came a little close. Having those childhood dreams, one of the people I followed closely and greatly admired was Tom McMillen. Being in D.C., I got to watch his career firsthand. His All-American career at the University of Maryland, his time playing with the then Washington Bullets, and his 3 terms in Congress representing the Maryland suburbs of D.C. Today, Tom is president and CEO of Lead1. Lead1 is an organization of athletic directors of Power 5 and Group of 5 programs. If you're not following Lead1, it's important that you do. There are links to their website and social media in the show notes. In coaching, we're always talking about how the number one job of an assistant is to help make your head coach successful. Well, we need to think the same way about the boss of everyone in the program, the athletic director. As the business of college sports has grown, so have the issues facing ADs. The changing landscape of sports media and broadcasting rights and platforms, legalized sports betting, a very new issue, societal issues like social protest, gender equity, sexual and domestic abuse. These are all the issues that keep ADs up at night. And while they may not have a direct impact on winning and losing games as a coach, you need to have a basic understanding of all of them and a professional, ethical, and legal knowledge of some. If there's an issue or a challenge that keeps your boss up at night, you better believe it impacts your job. Now, I know I spent some time on Tom's bio in the opening, but I think it's very important to understand his background and experience and how fortunate we are to have him as a leader in collegiate athletics. Here's my conversation with Tom McMillen. Leadership is a cornerstone of sports, and our guest today, Tom McMillen, has lived a lifetime of leading. In 1970, Tom was the nation's top recruited high school basketball player out of Mansfield, Pennsylvania. And that year, on February 16th, 1970, he became the first high school athlete to ever appear on the cover of Sports Illustrated magazine in an article chronicling his recruitment that concluded with him signing with Lefty Driesell and the University of Maryland. While at the University of Maryland, Tom's career included setting the school's highest career scoring average, a record he still holds, along with becoming an All-American and participating in the 1972 Olympics as a member of the U.S. men's basketball team that had a gold medal stolen from them, and yes, I said stolen from them, in the controversial game against the Soviet Union. And by the way, Tom accomplished all this while majoring in chemistry, graduating as valedictorian, and becoming the University of Maryland's very first Rhodes Scholar. As a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford University, Tom received a Bachelor and Master of Arts in Politics, Philosophy, and Economics. Tom went on to play for 4 teams in an 11-year NBA career, finishing in 1986 with the Washington Bullets, and in a season that saw him become the first and only active professional athlete to run for Congress. Winning that congressional election in 1986, Tom served 3 terms representing the 4th District of Maryland in the U.S. House of Representatives. Since leaving Congress, Tom became a founding member of the Knight Commission on Intercollegiate Athletics, has founded several publicly traded companies, and now serves as president and CEO of Lead1, an association of athletic directors of Division I programs. Tom, welcome to Beyond the Whistle.
It's great to be with you, Odell. I'm happy to join your show today.
Yeah. And Tom, I first want to say it is a personal honor to have you as a guest. As a kid growing up here in Washington, D.C., I had 2 dreams: to play the NBA and to be president of the United States. And I like to think that I came pretty close. Played basketball in college, worked for several years on the staff of one of your former congressional colleagues and mutual friend, Jim Moran. And as my time as an agent, represented players in the NBA and internationally. So again, I like to think I came pretty close, but not as close as you.
Well, those are pretty big goals. So congratulations to you for setting big goals in the first place.
Yeah. And, and as a kid, and I guess I'll say young man, not to make either one of us feel old, two people I greatly admired were Bill Bradley and yourself. And the two of you have had almost mirror images of careers. And in fact, I don't know how one person can accomplish what you both have. And for those who may not know or have forgotten, Bill Bradley was also a Rhodes Scholar, a highly recruited high school basketball player, Olympic gold medal winner, and played a 10-year NBA career and also served in the U.S. Senate. And Tom, while you were growing up, how knowledgeable were you of Bill Bradley?
Well, I was very knowledgeable of him. I met him, I think I was in 9th or 10th grade at a basketball camp, but I had been following his career. And for a young person like myself, he was a great role model. He was someone who balanced sports with school and did it with great excellence. And so I followed him, and as I said, he was one of my idols.
When did you first have an interest to run for public office?
It's interesting. When I was at Oxford after college, and then I continued at Oxford even when I was in the MBA, I went back in the summers. I majored in politics, philosophy, and economics over there, which was very different than my undergraduate program of chemistry. And so I got very interested in politics at that time. Even before that, when I was at college, one summer I worked in the U.S. Senate for Mike Mansfield. I worked in the cloakroom. So I had an interest in it. I was involved in student government at Maryland. I probably started thinking about running for office in the late 70s. I bought a house in Anne Arundel County in I think 79 or 80, and then I ended up running in 86. But to do that, I had to get Ted Turner to trade me back to Washington so I could play for the Bullets for a while. And funny enough, he did it. So it kind of worked out. And
I think that growing up here in the DC area played a big role in my interest in politics. Our local news here is the national and world news. And I was going to ask you, what impact did finishing your career in DC have on your political aspirations?
It was very, very big. When that Sports Illustrated story came out when I was in high school, the White House called and appointed me to the President's Council on Physical Fitness. Now, under Nixon, I was the youngest presidential appointee at 17, I think ever, even to this day. So one of the reasons I came to Maryland was because I thought that would be real fun to be, on a presidential commission and going to the White House, which I did. And that kind of continued to spark my interest in government and public service. As I said, I worked in the Senate one summer, and then I went to Oxford and did politics, philosophy, and economics. So, of course, being in the Washington area catalyzed a lot of that. And remember, when I was here, it was kind of a very interesting sports period. You had Lombardi and George Allen and Hank Williams, and you had some great sports icons in the area.
I mentioned in the intro that you've lived a lifetime of leadership. And what does leadership mean to you?
I think leadership is about when you're involved in an organization or even on a team, it's just really doing the right things, having goals, making sure that everybody in your organization understands the goals, working harder than anybody else to achieve them, and not being afraid to fail and fall on your face a few times. Leadership are qualities that you march ahead, but yet you're going to have failure along the way, and you have to persevere through that. Whether you're playing on a team or you in a political campaign or whatever, those are the same traits that apply.
Tom, in 2015, you became president and CEO of Lead1. Can you share with us more about the organization?
Lead1, historically, it was formed in 1986, was a consortium of the athletic directors of the largest, most powerful colleges and schools in college sports. Schools that make up the football subdivision. So to really be a part of it, you have to have big time football. And of course, if you get big time football, then your program is going to be one of the larger programs. So we have 131 schools, and we work with the programs and the ADs and the student athletes. And what we work on primarily is really shaping the rules of college sports, working with the NCAA on a myriad of issues, whether it's transfers, the Rice Commission, academic misconduct, time management. Those are the kind of issues, sports betting more recently, those are the kind of issues that we work on. We also work, in messaging and making sure that we provide services to our members, and also just looking for opportunities to make these schools better performing in their operations, whether it's buying healthcare insurance or air charters. So we work on a lot of different issues.
So prior to Lead1, I know you were having a very successful career in business. And what led you or spurred your interest in Lead1?
Well, it's interesting. When Kevin Anderson at the University of Maryland asked me about it, I initially wasn't interested. The search firm continued to talk to me about it, and it was based in Dallas. I obviously wasn't interested in going to Dallas, so they said, well, come to the interview and we're open on the location. So I went down and talked to them. They said, we'd be willing to move it to the Washington area. And then I thought about, well, college sports has changed so much since I was in school. I mean, it's such a big business now. It just when you think about it, and the stickiness of college sports with fans across this country, and how big it is to people, the loyalty to their institution. It's so different than when I was in school, and I thought it'd be a challenge to see what we could do here.
Yeah, in those years, and it feels like it's not very long, but we've gotten to a really pivotal area, point that I believe in college athletics. And you touched on some of it earlier, and we know the FBI investigation into college basketball, which spawned the Commission on College Basketball and its recommendations, and the Knight Commission's report on college basketball. How would you describe the state of college basketball? I know that's the interest of mine, the background of yours and many of my listeners, but as well as the state of college athletics overall.
Well, I think college athletics is very strong right now. Yeah, they have problems. We face those every day, whether it's concussion litigation or pay-for-play litigation, sports betting, transfers, all the issues. Millennials not going to the games as much. But overall, I would say college sports is really very strong. In any organization this size, you're going to have problems. You're going to have student athletes get in trouble, or more systemic issues like we saw in the FBI investigation. But overall, I would say, these kids, there's almost 500,000 of them going through college, the NCAA sports, and in our organization we have 78,000 kids. The vast majority of those kids are not basketball players or football players. They're playing a sport, and they'll go on to graduate and have productive careers. So people forget that. Well, oftentimes when they think about college sports, they just think about football and basketball, but it's so much more than that. I mean, of our 78,000 kids, only 20,000 of them are football and basketball players, both men and women. And so we oftentimes don't think about the vast majority of the kids who are playing softball and hockey and all the other sports.
So, Tom, going back to the FBI investigation, and as much as you can share with us, when that bombshell came in last September, what was the reaction and conversation like with your members? And kind of can you share with us what kind of the response was in terms of bringing your members together for that conversation?
Well, ironically, the announcement came in the middle of our annual meeting in Washington, D.C., and Mark Emmert, the head of the NCAA, was there, and he got up to speak just moments after the announcement came out, and really no one understood what it meant. Several of our ADs had to leave the meeting because their schools were named, and they exited the meeting. But really, no one understood what it all meant. When you have the power of the federal government investigating something, obviously it's very meaningful. That doesn't happen. It hasn't happened in college sports, so it was a big wake-up call. I think that the vast majority of college sports, college basketball, and the vast majority of the players are above board and beyond reproach. But in any organization, you're going to have those who try to cut corners, and some of that occurred. And I think the good news about the FBI investigation is that it'll put folks on notice, not that they can't get away with stuff. The tools that the FBI has, wiretapping and subpoenas, are tools that the NCAA does not have. And so it will make it more likely that people think twice in the future about engaging in nefarious activities because they realize that the federal government could be watching them.
We've now seen the report from the Commission on College Basketball and the Knight Commission's report as well. Where do you see us being in terms of next steps? And I know it's on the NCAA, but when you work with your members, where do you see us being in terms of next steps to take from those reports?
I think the next step, obviously, they're trying to codify it in legislation and get it in place before next basketball season. I think that was the mandate, and I think they'll achieve that. A lot of people said, well, it didn't address the core issues of paying athletes. Well, I think as they say, you shouldn't let perfection be the enemy of the good. I think there's a lot of positives in that report, and I think a lot of it will be implemented. Whether it, completely reforms college sports is another thing, but I think it's a step in the right direction, and hopefully this will get done in the next couple months, and we can begin to see some of these reforms.
One of the recommendations I was happy to see was allowing college student athletes to have representation in a structured environment of NCAA certified agents, because during my time as an agent, I felt that student athletes and parents and families needed access to more information, not less. And when contact was restricted and limited, what would generally happen at the selection process is that all of us look and sound the same, sound alike, and no past reference point. Decisions were made based on who's giving me what, or who looks a certain way, or dresses a certain way, or speaks a certain way, without any thought as to who can best represent me and position me for success in my professional career. So that's one thing I was really happy about. And I know you've spoken on that thought of representation as well.
I do think it's a positive step. This is a very big decision for kids, and I do think that if you look at the baseball example and some of the examples, that there are more flexibility in getting counsel. But as anything, it oftentimes is abused. These agents can be detrimental to the process as well. But I think overall that it's important to be able to allow these kids to have some kind of guidance when they're making this decision. This is a very big decision. I mean, sometimes when kids are trying to decide whether they're going to go into the NBA, it's going to happen with more frequency because the money is so big now. The NBA is creating alternatives for kids outside of college, their academies, the G League. And I think it's just inevitable that these pressures are going to continue to grow, and kids should have some ability to get counsel on these matters.
What's the conversation been like since the Supreme Court ruling on sports betting, and how do you see that impacting college athletics?
Well, as a matter of fact, we have a call today to talk about it with a lot of our ADs. It's an interesting evolution. I was in Congress in the early 90s when PASPA was passed. It was very non-controversial. It was a voice vote in the House. But now, as we move forward 25 years or 26 years later, the world's changed. I mean, gambling is everywhere around the world except the illegal gambling's everywhere around the world except the United States. And you look at the amount of illegal gambling that's occurring in America, 150 billion or so. It makes sense to try to find a structure where you can regulate it, legalize it, and tax it. And even though our ADs were initially opposed to it, I think 80% of our ADs were opposed to legalizing sports betting. I think that they're realists in the sense that they realize that it's probably going to come and they're going to have to manage through it. What bothers our ADs a lot is that these kids are very vulnerable. They're not, making millions of dollars like pro athletes. And all the sports scandals involving sports betting in the last 25 years involving players have been at the college level. And you can name a whole bunch of schools that have had problems in this area. And when it happens to a school, it's catastrophic. Now, the legal market will have more protection in a lot of ways. You'll have better integrity services, better data, better ways to catch anomalies and illegal activity. But human nature as it is, when you have gambling so close as you have at UNLV and some of those other schools, the temptations are going to be there. And it's going to require a lot of effort in our schools to keep these programs clean and keep their players clean. Yeah. So it's going to be a challenge.
And Tom, is it fair to say that a legalized structure can actually help with some of that integrity? Because I believe that of those college betting scandals, they were first alerted or came to light by Vegas sports books recognizing, hey, there's a lot of movement on this random Tuesday night college basketball game. That's there's a lot of activity here, and let's alert the feds and the appropriate authorities.
No question. I think in a legalized market, what has changed in the 26 years since PASPA was passed is these integrity services, these companies that use big data and so forth to analyze these kind of gambling trends. That wasn't around back when PASPA was passed. Today it's very prevalent. But even with that, you notice in tennis in Europe, for example, they're worried about some more scandals. And tennis is a big sport of gambling in Europe, where data goes right from the linesman to the sports books, and yet they've had concerns about gambling incidences in tennis. So the fact that you have integrity services, the fact that you legalize it, you're still going to have temptations. And that's what you have to worry about, because for a college and university to have a sports betting scandal, it's so contrary to what universities are all about, which is educating student athletes. To have a sports betting scandal on the front page of their local newspaper is catastrophic for a university. And so it'll be a challenge. There are risks, and our schools are going to have to devote resources to making sure that everything is okay.
Yeah. Tom, you've been a champion for diversity your entire career. And I think in 2017, 2018 have been good years for advancing diversity in college athletics. We've seen women AD hirings like Heather Lyke at Pitt and Carla Williams at Virginia. And Carla became the first African-American woman AD in the ACC. And we've seen African-American males like Alan Green hired at Auburn and Martin Jarman at Boston College. Yet in coaching, we're experiencing almost a disappearance of black coaches. The Big Ten will go into its third season now without a black head men's basketball coach. And that league was once a pioneering organization of racial diversity. And how would you rate diversity across collegiate athletics and coaching and administration today?
I think at the AD level, there is really a legitimate bona fide attempt by universities to bring diversity to the table. As you said, more women, more diverse candidates and so forth. I think you see more and more of that occurring. And that's positive. And there's been a lot of efforts. We run an institute every year where we bring in which we train upcoming ADs about what it's like to be in the chair, how you get the job, what do you do when you get the job. And we give out 10 minority scholarships every year from the McClendon Scholarship, because we think that extremely important in getting more diversity is preparing candidates for the jobs and so forth. In the coaching world, it's very interesting. I'm not as close to that. I don't, but I do hear your point. It's a challenge because most of these coaches rise through the ranks. Same way with college ADs. And unless you're kind of training them and giving them the backgrounds, you're not going to have the results at the end of the tunnel. So I think there's work to be done in this area. There's no question.
Yeah, when I survey the gap or the landscape, I should say, in coaching, and my greater familiarity is in basketball coaching. It's you hit it right on there. It's the pipeline and that gap in the early stages of the pipeline. Because I'll be quite candid here. When it comes to minorities in sports, too many of us focus on the athlete side of the business, because I think it's easiest for minorities to relate to players because of the number of players and the prominence they play, like on what I call the front stage. But in the backstage, that's what really funnels individuals into those lifelong sports careers. And college coaches are more and more starting out as student managers, graduate assistants, video coordinators, as you mentioned again, in that early pipeline. And now it's including analytics. And that's where I see almost a complete void of young minorities. It's almost non-existent.
I agree with that. I know that last week I was at Learfield in Dallas, and they have a minority academy. They were training about 20 young minority managers for jobs in college sports and related businesses and so forth. Those kind of efforts, along with what we do, really develop the pool of talent that allows schools to have the opportunity to be more diverse. I don't see the same thing in the coaching side. I agree with you. I think it hasn't been as organized as the administration side.
And speaking of coaching hires and career journeys, from the experiences of your Lead1 members and what they share with you all as an organization, what are the qualities they value most in evaluating coaching candidates?
Well, I think to be a head coach today is a very unique quality. You have to be able to recruit, and oftentimes that is delegated, but the head coach still, especially in basketball, is still vitally important in that. And obviously, people want to look at a proven track record. One of the problems that you have in college sports today is kids start, they get a job, and then they go to a small school, and they're the coach there. And the way they survive is play bigger schools and get those guaranteed fee games, those guaranteed games that pay them. But here they're playing teams that are much better than they are, that hurts their records, but they're doing it to financially stay alive. So when you're in that sort of vortex, it's hard to get out of it, because how do you break out when you're playing teams where you're going to lose? You're really getting paid to lose. And that didn't exist when I played. You played teams based generally on geography and making sure that the kids didn't have to travel too far. Today, it's become more commercial, and oftentimes these games are played against inferior opponents for the purpose of, look, I'll pay you. We'll come and play, and you get paid, and chances are you're going to lose. That makes it really hard for a young coach to break out of that. I think that is one of the shackles that's on young coaches today. So a lot of coaches end up coming up the ranks, being assistants to head coaches and learning the ropes that way, and then they get a break. But it's a hard grind to get to the top. There's no question about it.
Yeah, Tom, you brought up a point that I don't think is being mentioned when you talk about progression of coaches and minority coaches, or any coaches at the low D1 level, as you mentioned, is the impact on losing those guarantee games. And we understand the financial and economic realities of it. But it's tough it's hard to convince an AD who has to convince a university president and alumni and fan base, to hire someone with a losing record. You look at a guy like Mike Davis, who just last week was hired from a Texas Southern, playing those guarantee games, and was hired at the University of Detroit. But Mike had that experience also at an Indiana, at a UAB, almost had kind of a reverse career, if you will. But I think that's a point that's not being discussed as part of this conversation.
And the other thing is that in the AD world, the ADs largely set the football schedule, or they work with their football coach. In the basketball world, the basketball coaches are oftentimes setting that schedule, and they're so concerned about preserving their win-loss record. I mean, now that's changing a little bit as the RPI and all that gets a little more important. But historically, the basketball coaches have set their schedules, and many of them just don't want to lose. They want to preserve their record. So it makes it very hard if you're on the other side of that and you're trying to break out. It's very difficult, and small school coaches have enormous difficulty. One, scheduling the right opponents. Two, oftentimes it's a pecuniary relationship. We'll come, you lose, kind of thing. And as I said, it makes it very difficult to break out and to excel as a smaller school coach.
And Tom, in running a program, coaches obviously need to focus on recruiting and winning games and player academics. How important do you believe is it for coaches to understand the issues that keep your AD members up at night beyond their sport? And I'm thinking media rights and current challenges in team travel that I know you guys are playing a role in that conversation, and understand the political landscape of their institution. How important is it for coaches to understand those components of the collegiate sports industry?
When I was at Maryland, Lefty really personally took command and also very strong influence over making sure Cole Fieldhouse was packed. Mm-hmm. And I oftentimes see coaches not taking that responsibility. It's tougher and tougher in certain schools getting the young people to come to games. And even at Maryland, it's hard to fill these big arenas up now. You notice that most schools are downsizing their arenas. They're putting more luxury facilities in there because it's so hard to fill them up. If you have 16, 17,000, 15,000 seats, it's really, really hard to fill that night after night. And so I think coaches need to think about their product and how it's being received in the marketplace. But there are other issues as well. Right in the middle of, obviously, right now is the transfer issue with the NCAA's rulemaking on that. You're going to have much more open transfers in the future, and that's going to have a lot of unintended consequences. Kids can now say, I want to transfer. They go into a database, and who knows? Obviously, everybody's going to try to recruit them. So to be a coach today, it's like you never stop recruiting. You don't want your players to go into that database if they're really good, and it gets so complicated. When I was in school, we had very few transfers. You might have 2 or 3 in your whole career. Now it's like 37% of kids transfer, 40% of college freshman basketball players transfer by their sophomore year. So it's a revolving door, makes it extremely difficult for a coach. But a lot of these things, unfortunately, were brought upon college sports by sort of bad acting. We ended up coaches trying to deny kids the right to transfer and so forth, and you get a lot of backlash. And then what happens is that we pass a rule which is going to could potentially have some unintended consequences. Again, the larger schools will be in a favored position because they can go after these smaller school players and who aren't happy and who want to move to a bigger program. And you never know. It's very hard. Also, these underground, behind the scenes intermediaries pushing kids around. That's going to continue. So it'll be interesting to see what the unintended consequences of this are. I do think it will exacerbate the competitive equity issue in college sports. I think the great players will go to the great schools, and because that's where they're going to be seen. That gives them a better chance to be drafted. So you're going to continue to see that kind of migration.
Tom, you have an event coming up in July that you just mentioned earlier, the Lead1 Institute. Can you share with us the date, location, and who that event is for and how one can register to attend?
The Institute is really, we run it on a college campus every year, and this year it's at TCU in Fort Worth, and we run it every year in July 16th, 17th, and 18th. And it's a program designed for individuals who are that really close to being ready to take a head AD job. And so we ask our ADs to nominate folks, and we keep it to 50 people, and we have our peer-to-peer faculty. We have a lot of ADs come in and give sessions on the first 100 days, what it takes to be an AD. This year we're adding a whole bunch of executive search firms to the mix, but it's a 3-day program that we train young aspiring ADs how to become an AD. And as I said, this year we're going to have executive search firms to be part of it.
Tom, I know there's so much more we can discuss on these topics, and I want to thank you for your time and for being on the show. Where can we go to learn more about Lead1 and to connect with you?
If they want to email me, I'm at tom@lead1a.com.
And Tom, is there anything you would like to leave coaches who are listening to help them better understand or think about what keeps their bosses up, their ADs bosses up at night, or what they're looking for as they're running athletic departments?
What is really interesting to me is how the societal issues have really moved into sports at a big time. You look at all the the political issues that have come out. What do you do about kids that are protesting, or the sexual misconduct, the Me Too issues, all the recruiting, payola, and all those things. It's really, if you're an AD today, you just hope to God you don't wake up and one of these things blows up on you. And the whole, obviously what we've seen at some of our schools with the sexual assault issues and so forth are really devastating for the AD and for the school. And it's so difficult. What I see happening in college sports is that there are better systems being put in place. The corporate world has learned to handle this a lot better than the college sports world. Now they're putting systems in place so that when someone reports an incident, it really goes up the flagpole. Everybody knows about it. These things aren't pushed under the carpet like they were in the past. And so I think more transparency, more accountability is making the system better. But nevertheless, if you're an AD, you have to sit there and wonder, first of all, I'm under continued financial pressure. I've got to keep my donors happy. I've got to make sure that I get the right group of coaches. I got to watch all the litigation going on. I got new issues like transfers and sports betting to deal with. Broadcast issues are changing with cord cutting. You've got the FBI in on some of this basketball. So it's a tough job. Much tougher than it was 20 years ago. And so when you look at these businesses, our range of schools goes from 194 million or close to 200 million to 22 million. So there are extreme differences in those schools, and it's a challenge to manage through that.
Well, Tom, again, thank you very much for being on Beyond the Whistle.
Absolutely. Glad to do it, Odell.
Thank you for listening to Beyond the Whistle. Please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. It's the best way to stay updated on the newest episodes. Beyond the Whistle is a production of McCants Sports, a sports executive search and talent solutions firm. To learn more about McCants Sports, visit mccantsports.com.